It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be here, speak with you all tonight, see some familiar folks. So thanks again for having me. And yeah, in terms of questions, Jim, if you would just be able to monitor the chat and let me know if there's something that would be like helpful to clarify, during. Otherwise, I think at the end would be great, but I don't want anybody to be sitting there confused, if I can avoid it. So that'd be great. Thanks. Okay. So I work for Recreation and Parks. I was the project manager for the Urban Forestry Master Plan, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through our process and kind of where we are to date since our plan was passed earlier this year. So this is kind of where we started in Columbus. We knew that on a 2014 study, Columbus was ranked as the fastest growing heat island in the country of the 60 large metro areas that were surveyed. So we know that heat is an issue and continues to be more of one over the years. We are facing rapid and significant growth here in Columbus, as you know, predicting to have many more residents over the next decade. And so it's important to grow in a smart way. We have relatively low tree canopy cover. I'm going to share a visual in a few slides, but essentially we're lower than many of our peer cities, which has impacts to our residents, like public health impacts, right? So we know the benefits of trees. There's so many, and of course one of them is reducing some of those stressors like heat and air pollution. And then, climate change is facing us, it's here, and that is going to be a stress both on our residents here in Columbus, but also on the trees that are growing in Columbus. So for all these reasons, we decided it would be a good thing to create a master plan for all of Columbus's trees. So this is the first master plan that Columbus has had, and it covers our entire urban forest. The idea is that it's all the trees growing in Columbus, no matter if they're growing on public land or private land, it's all one forest. And we've laid out some short-term and long-term goals that I'll go through with you a little bit later. But essentially, our vision here is to preserve, maintain, and increase tree canopy, right? So, of course, we want to grow our canopy, but it's just as important to preserve the trees that we have and care for the trees that we have. Now, I mentioned that we're a little bit behind some of our peers. So the last time that we did a study in Columbus, we found that 22% of the city of Columbus is covered by trees. And so that's one way you can measure your urban forest is by your canopy cover, right? So how much of your land is covered by trees. So Columbus is at 22%. Now that's a little bit higher than Cleveland, which is at 19%, but it's far behind Pittsburgh at 40%, Cincinnati 39%, Louisville 37%, or Minneapolis 30%. So we knew coming into this planning process that we wanted to look at substantially increasing our canopy cover. So we launched the master plan process in fall of 2019. It was fascinating to, like everyone here, like we did globally pivot during the pandemic, but I think we're able to keep on track through events like these virtually. And our plan passed City Council in April of this year. So we felt like it was important. It's a citywide plan for City Council to, in addition, of course, with the mayor's office approval and individual departments, that we have City Council's support in implementing this master plan. Throughout the process, there's a lot of stakeholders in the urban forest, from our residents and our community groups to utility companies, nonprofits, universities, builders and developers and landscape architects and realtors. There's so many folks who are, stakeholders in our forest. And so it was important for us when we were creating the plan to tap into the expertise that all of these stakeholders have. The map on the right shows Columbus in gray. If you're like me, and even though you lived in Columbus, you've never really looked closely at a map of Columbus, It's pretty odd. There's a lot of what I've heard people call cutouts, but basically there's, we have suburbs and municipalities embedded within us and on our edges. So like Upper Arlington and Bexley and Whitehall and others. So what is gray is City of Columbus, and that's our focus because we're City of Columbus. But of course, it's a regional effort. And we engage city foresters from other cities as well in our region and the county, et cetera. So the dots here on this map are showing our public meeting attendees. We had our public meeting, I'll show you a picture, early March 2020, and it was a different world, elbow to elbow. But we had over 100 folks who came out, and you can see, I mostly show this just because it was important to us to get a geographic distribution across Columbus, not just one neighborhood represented. The red dots are showing the advisory group members. Columbus has what are called area commissions, and so we tapped into the local area commissions to give us representatives as well. And the dots in green are just folks who live in the Columbus area, but not strictly within City of Columbus limits. So the public outreach that we did, the public input that we received, I mentioned the open house. Let's Talk Trees. This is an image from the open house here on the right. And like I said, it was early March, and it was a different world. We had 135 folks come out there. We also did a survey online for anyone who couldn't make the public meeting or just wanted to provide additional comment. We had about 300 comments during that comment period. We had small group presentations, much like this one. We had one-on-one interviews with 30 of our stakeholders, both city and city partners. And then we had 2 stakeholder groups, more of a project team, which is kind of like a steering committee, and then a larger advisory group who we engaged through the course of 3 workshops. The photo on the left here is our January workshop, January 2020, and we had a lot of small group interaction and discussion, and it was fun. Okay, we also did a lot of analyses beyond the public input. That was a pillar of our plan, but another obviously crucial part was just the analysis itself of our existing data. So first thing is that our data is very out of date with the City of Columbus and our urban forestry information. So the urban tree canopy assessment I mentioned, that's where we looked at land cover and the 22% of trees covering Columbus. So that data is actually from 2013. It was published in 2015, but the imagery that they were looking at was from 2013. So it's kind of a snapshot in time. And that's our only data point. So that's problematic, right? We can't see any trends. We just have kind of, this is what Columbus was in 2013. Then our public tree inventory is even more out of date. The last time we did a citywide inventory of all of our street trees. So this is an arborist walking up to a tree, measuring it, recording key information about the species, health, et cetera, of that tree. The last time that was done comprehensively across the city was 1998. So you can imagine how out of date that information can get if you went to the doctor one time in 1998 and got your height and weight there and your health. Things can change, not the species, but pretty much everything else. So even though we had updated as we touched trees, there at the time our inventory had 105,000 street trees in it, and we just had not done a comprehensive update. So that was important. The distribution of our urban forest. So 70% of trees in Columbus are growing on private property, which is important for this plan because that is a crucial part of the majority of our canopy is on private property. For species diversity, we looked at our public tree inventory. Like I mentioned, species is one of those things that shouldn't change unless the tree is cut down, and we were tracking that. So you can see here in the graph on the right, we have the urban forest composition, and you can see we're very heavy on maples, like the maple genus. And so there's a rule in urban forestry that you don't want to have, it's called the 10-20-30 rule. You don't want to have more than 10% of any individual species. You don't want to have more than 20% of any individual genus and no more than 30% of any family. So the fact that Columbus has 29% of maples, right? So the maple genus could be black maple or sugar maple or Norway maple or red maple, but all these maples are breaking this kind of rule of thumb for forestry, which just means that our forest is then vulnerable to pests like Asian longhorn beetle that like to eat, feed on maples, among other things. So it just makes us vulnerable. And then finally, the resources. So Columbus staff and budgeting for forestry was compared to a municipal tree census that was done nationwide. And our consultants were able to see that Columbus was both spending less per street tree, so $26 in Columbus annually compared to $35 for Midwest cities or $42 for all cities. And we also, our staff were handling more street trees than the national average. So just a lack of resources. Another important finding of our analysis portion of the master plan was around our code. So Columbus is here in this column, and I know it's a lot going on in this table. Let me walk you through it. So Columbus is the far left column, and we compared our tree codes to 3 other cities. Now, 2 of them, Gahanna and Dublin, are neighboring, municipalities here in Central Ohio. They're clearly not peer cities of Columbus, but we thought it was important to look at the regulations that they enforce around trees, because it could give us some insight to what what the building and development community they're already working in the same, region. And then we also compared to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a peer city of Columbus in terms of population and size. So if you can just look down the column, it's pretty dramatic. Across most categories, Columbus is lacking in tree protection. So there's the category of land use, like what sort of land use and our trees protected through that. Really, we just have public tree code citywide. There is a little X here around multifamily residential and here in specific size of trees. That is because there's a zoning overlay in the university district that restricts removal of trees over, I think it's 10 inches. I don't know that anybody enforces that or anybody's really even aware of it. It was news to me. It's just when our consultants were going through our code, that was a little bit of an anomaly. So that is like a qualifier, but really citywide, we're lacking, private tree protections, requiring permits for tree removal on private property, preservation during development, regulating the root zone around trees, minimum canopy cover, fencing during construction, site plans. There's just really nothing citywide covering private trees. Now, public trees, like I mentioned, we do have city code that protects public trees, and so those are noted, but otherwise, we're lacking some common tree protections that you can see in these other cities. And that is unusual for a large city, our consultants shared. I'd like to talk about equity because it was a key takeaway for our stakeholders. It's also really important to our administration and our entire city. So I mentioned the 22% canopy cover. That's the average across all of Columbus, but there's a lot of variation between what we call communities. So, and that variation is from 9% in downtown is the lowest, area where folks are living and working with trees, all the way to 41% in Clintonville. Collectively, those trees are providing us $38 million a year in benefits, and those are just the benefits that we're measuring, right? There's so many other intrinsic benefits of trees, but the benefits are not distributed equally, and they're also, I'll show you in the next slide. There's obviously historic disinvestment in Columbus, as there is across the country. And so this map is showing the redlined areas and the other areas that were zoned during this program, the Homeowners Loan Corporation program. These maps often correspond with lower tree canopy and just in general, less investment in those neighborhoods. So looking at our planting and just in general, our investment with an equity lens, our stakeholders chose 9 factors for us to study and incorporate into a social equity index. Those were families in poverty, educational attainment, median household income, percent non-white population, asthma, COPD, and mental health prevalence, and then property and violent crime. So we chose these factors. We gave kind of a wider array of factors that could be chosen for Columbus. We didn't feel like that was something the city needed to decide on its own. We really wanted to get that input, and our stakeholders actually voted for the factors they thought were most appropriate to study in Columbus. And the result is this map here on the right. It's a bivariate map. So it's combining two different variables here. So on the left is a legend, and canopy percentage goes on the y-axis from low to high, and then the social equity index also goes on the x-axis from low to high. So we're wanting to call out, this is divided into census tracts, the census tracts within Columbus that have low tree canopy and also are showing a higher need based on these 9 factors. And you can see that, you know, again, if we kind of go back to that red line map, a lot of these areas correspond because of that disinvestment. So this is a tool for Columbus and for our partners to focus our efforts on areas where trees can really provide the most benefits to our community. And then this is another way of showing similar information. So I mentioned that score. The equity score is from 0 to 4. And so the closer you are to 4, the higher you ranked in terms of equity and need. And then on the right here, there's canopy cover by these community boundaries. And there are 6 areas within Columbus that are just odd. They're not truly neighborhoods. So we didn't score them, such as the airport or Wolf Park on Broad Street, or there's a couple industrial corridors. I just mentioned that if you're like, why is it gray here? That's why we didn't score those areas, because no one's really living there. They're more administrative boundaries. But for these others, we can see the canopy cover, again, 22% is coming down the middle here. It's the average. And you can see the difference between, or, you know, the combination, again, of equity and canopy, because both of those things are important as we're prioritizing our work. So together with our project team members, we created a vision for Columbus's urban forest. And again, it's to prioritize, preserve, and grow the tree canopy in Columbus, equitably across neighborhoods to improve health and quality of life for all residents. So again, I always try to highlight the importance of not just planting, but also prioritizing trees throughout the development process, throughout their life cycle, preserving them and caring for them, and also growing our canopy. So all of those things are going to be critical as we go forward. Out of our vision, we created 3 goals, again, with a lot of public comments and input. So our overall goal is to reach 40% canopy citywide by 2050. 40% is, again, the 22% was from 2013. So until we do our next study, we're not sure exactly where we are today. Could be the same, could be a little higher, could be lower. Anecdotally, I know a lot of our project team members were concerned that we were lower than in 2013. So it's essentially doubling our canopy. So it's a very ambitious goal, but one that we felt was very much supported both by research in terms of really going for that quality of life, but also our stakeholders felt very strongly that 40% was the right goal to aim for, even though it is ambitious. And 2050 really aligns with a lot of our climate action goals with the city. We also have 2 shorter-term goals. One is to create no net loss by 2030. So I mentioned preservation, and it's, you know, trees take such a long time to grow. We all know that. And so really the planting is important, but we don't see the effects of that for years and years, right, on our canopy percentage. And so really first and foremost, you know, we need to be looking at how we can stop losing canopy if we ever want to grow our canopy. And finally, equity. We want to invest in equitable canopy across our neighborhoods by 2030. And that's really looking at, again, what are those neighborhoods with high need and low canopy? You know, what do they need? Planting trees, but also preserving and maintaining trees in those communities. Out of those goals, we created 4 strategies and within them 15 actions. So I know it's a lot. Feel free to ask or put questions in the chat, or I'm happy to if anything's not clear, but I'm going to kind of give you a high level of this. So within community coordination and collaboration, so there was a lot of findings that we need more partnerships, as a city. And there's not really one group within Columbus who has coordinated at a citywide level tree projects. And so this has been a really successful model for some other cities, such as Cleveland, the Cleveland Tree Coalition. So our consultants felt that it would be important to explore this in Columbus and have a community group, or umbrella kind of group that could serve as a forum and synergy around tree planting projects, and that the city could be a partner with. Messaging and education came up as a really important piece of this plan from our stakeholders. Improving our communication and collaboration both within city departments, across city departments, and with our partners externally. Sharing tree data with the community, we have not done the best at that in the past, and we really want to improve and make the data that we invest in really accessible and useful for our partners and the public. And then engaging and supporting volunteers and partners in public tree planting and care. Around best practices, I mentioned the equity tool, and that's a tool, right, to prioritize our tree planting, again, in areas where trees can be doing the most benefit, providing most benefits. Ensuring that there's space for trees, something that we're finding is that Columbus has very narrow tree lawns, or very narrow growing space for trees, which kind of limits the size of the tree because of the soil volume that can successfully grow in that space. So when possible, when we're developing new streets, can we make sure that there's more space and kind of work on those street standards? And that's, of course, very cross-departmental collaboration. Or can we retrofit in areas where it's older and we need the space? I mentioned Columbus Forestry. So within my department, Recreation and Parks, Forestry takes care of these 100,000 plus street trees. And it had been a very reactive situation. So really, Forest, and I'll show a graphic later, but Forestry was doing a couple things. They were responding to resident requests. They were planting trees. They have not been able to maintain trees as much as they would like, or inventory trees. So it's made us more reactive, and so really need to transition to proactive care. An urban forestry best practices manual, something we heard from other departments that they could find really useful. And again, just trying to put trees, prioritize trees within, all of our operations and, creation of new neighborhoods, et cetera. And then, this is an adaptive plan. So measuring our progress and reassessing what we need to change. I mentioned resources was a finding, lack of resources. So identifying supplemental funding sources for this plan. Staff are also a key resource. And so expanding the size and scope of urban forestry leadership. I'll share in a little bit about our city forester position, but we've really taken a hard look at how forestry is operating and how our staff can better take care of the trees we have and also serve the public. And then maintaining our tree data, right? So we'll talk about that too, because really you can't manage what you don't understand. And so that's really critical. And finally, policies. So we want to create something for private tree protection that would be an impact citywide, and then also improve our current public tree ordinance and really just strengthen it, modernize it. It's from the 1990s, and it can use some attention. I mentioned this is a graphic I created to help explain to our leadership kind of how forestry had been functioning, right? So I mentioned the tree planting, and they'd also been doing what we call emergency response, right? Going out to calls, handling resident requests as they could, obviously, handling emergency tree situations, but really not doing any healthy tree care. Ideally, you would come back to all your trees that you're managing within a 7 to 10 year cycle and at least do an inspection and see what that tree needs, and often prune the tree because it's like preventative maintenance, right? It's like this bridge. You would want someone regularly inspecting your bridge because you don't want it to fail. It's the same. Trees are just another sort of infrastructure, and they can have the same sorts of consequences if they're not cared for. So we hadn't been doing much of that, and we also had not been updating our data comprehensively. So without all 4 of those supports, our trees are at risk. And I'd like to share just some progress we've made so far. Like I said, April was when our plan was officially passed. So we've gotten, 7 months behind us now. And this is the first thing I'll talk to you about is street tree inventory. So I mentioned that we hadn't had an update since 1998. So we started in 2020. We did our pilot with South Linden because that was the community that ranked the absolute highest in terms of our social equity scoring. And then we've gone on to do 6 more communities in that time for a total of 7 listed there: Southside, Southwest, Milo Grogan, North Central, Far South, and Franklinton. And those were chosen a combination of the equity score, but also because we were able to leverage federal funding, community development block grant funding, which can be used in low income areas. So it was a win-win for us. We've leveraged so far $250,000 of that funding to do this work. It is kind of expensive compared to the other type of assessment because it's so granular. You're collecting information on each individual tree. So it's close to $5 a tree, just getting that arborist to go out and collect that information and then getting it into a usable format in our street tree inventory, which is shown there on the right. It's a GIS system. We have budgeted $300,000 of capital that we will, I think we'll launch the project probably in January for the next 4 neighborhoods. But our goal is to complete the entire citywide inventory by the end of next year. So it's important for us to get this information, like I said, so we can immediately turn around and start using it. Where there are hazardous trees that are really a danger to the public, where the stumps that we need to grind to open up that planting space, and most importantly, right, or one of the things that we get the most excited about is we're cataloging all of the planting spaces that are available, which is something that our old inventory did not have, and it'll really allow us to take this information and run with it and, again, be more proactive. We've also been, on the city side, working on a budget expansion for forestry. In 2020, they were able to hire a forestry plan reviewer. This year, they've hired a 4th regional arborist, so 2 key full-time positions. Before this, the planting manager was juggling contracts and the nursery and also plan review when it came to tree things, and it was just a lot for one person to do, so it's great to have dedicated folks. We revised the city forester job description and re-envisioned it as this position that will kind of do what I'm doing, but more, right? Like being able to talk to the public, talk to other departments, really high-level planning, coordination, in addition to overseeing all of forestry's operations and implementing ultimately this urban forestry master plan. So that got a revamp, and we're hiring that position. So if there's anyone you know, there's a few more days. The application window closes on December 6th. So we're hoping we have some good candidates and we can hire early in the next year. We were awarded $1.5 million of capital funding from the mayor's office, and it was recently appropriated by City Council in September expressly for the implementation of this plan. That included staff, the street tree inventory I mentioned, contracts, and equipment. We are planning to ask for this money every year, and our leadership is very supportive and wants to. Forestry is a very expensive thing, right? A log truck could be $1 million. So it's real expensive to just manage so many trees, have the staff, have the equipment, be growing the forest as we'd like to. So it's great that we have that support. And then we've also designated $1 million in this year for contract tree planting, and that's through our capital funding that our department gets and also through grant funding. And another thing I'd like to share about is coalition building and code. So we extended our contract with one of our consultants, Urban Canopy Works, and they did a lot of the outreach and engagement for us. And we've assembled our stakeholders. We came together, wanted to share some updates and just start a conversation about a tree coalition. And so that happened earlier this month. And really now we hope that those stakeholders are interested, and I know that they've met once already, and we just really are hopeful that the community is interested in forming some sort of a loose coalition so that we can really coordinate at a high level together. And then tree code. So I showed you this graph already. We're going to start with public tree code, and then we'll move on to the private tree code. So that contract extension is going to be covering the public tree code phase of things, and we're hoping to kick that off here in the next few months. And education. So this is a key theme for our stakeholders. We've recorded 2 educational videos so far. We'd like to do more, so if you have ideas, please share. We did one about planting a tree and how to prune a tree, and there's so many videos out there about planting a tree, but we really, if you see on the right, this is Area Commissioner Peggy Williams in South London, and it's hard to know where to place a tree and how to be the right size and the right species, and taking into account the sidewalk and the power line. So that was a goal of our video was, again, there's tons of videos out there about digging the hole, but really trying to get the right tree in the right place. I know that can be intimidating as a homeowner. I feel the same way. And then pruning, again, going back to the encouraging on the private side, the growth of canopy, planting and preserving trees and caring for trees on private property is just as important. And so if you can prune a young tree, it can really set it up for success and extend its life up to 10 years on average. So that's really critical as well. And there's a lot you can do as a homeowner while it's young. So overall, just some lessons that I've learned from this process: the importance of using existing data that we have, engaging a diverse group of stakeholders, including other city departments, regular communication, both with leadership and staff and our stakeholders, including equity in our efforts and planning our investments. And then just, again, kind of goes back to communication, but telling our story. We had a project website that I think was helpful, using social media, leveraging these sorts of presentations, news articles, et cetera, just keeping folks in the loop about what's going on. And that is everything I had. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Rosalie. That was all great information, and great to see the cities doing all that. To all of the participants, I encourage you to submit any questions through the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that as well. I do have one question to start off. You mentioned that the goal is the 40% urban tree canopy. Have there been efforts to visualize or illustrate what that would actually look like in terms of where that's going to be made up, or the 22% is an average of all the differences right now? So in those different neighborhoods, have there been kind of back of the napkin calculations to see what certain areas need to be increased to, or anything like that?
That's a great question, Jim. Thanks. So we haven't done the back of the napkin, like neighborhood by neighborhood, some cities do that. Like, what's the canopy goal for each specific neighborhood versus just the citywide goal? I think, as we know, with 40%, just like with 22%, there's going to be a lot of variation, as there should be. We really should be focusing on getting trees near where people live and work. And, there's often, like, when there are those or land use cover goal, canopy cover goals, there's usually less of focus on industrial areas and more on, again, where people are spending time. That said, we did do a priority planting analysis throughout the city. That is one of those things we want to make more interactive and publicly available. But that was a really cool analysis to look at. It was stormwater, urban heat island, and then that equity mapping, and looking at citywide, public and private land, where could we fit trees? So it's not so much that projection, but it does show, where is the space for trees. And it started out with a model, planting, citing the large trees first, because large trees provide much more benefits, of course, than smaller trees, and then going into medium and small. So that'll be a great tool to be able to just see, like, well, where would there be even a space for trees? And a final thing I'll say about that is that the next canopy study that we do should provide some more insight, both on where we are. We'll probably do it on 2021 imagery, because the imagery is usually, collected in the summer when leaves are on the trees, leaf on. And so we'll be doing a change analysis as part of that study and seeing where we've gained or lost, at a more granular level. So I think that that'll inform that more, in-depth planning or projecting.
Oops, great, thank you. We have another question, and a couple that are kind of related. How do native species figure into the plan?
Sure. So I am a huge fan of native plants. That's the other hat that I get to wear, is creating pollinator habitat in our parkland. So I'm a big fan. When it comes to our forest as a whole, I think it's always best if we can plant native trees, whether it's on public or private property. The caveat with that, and I'm not a forester, right? I'm a planner, even though I feel like now I practically work for forestry, but I don't. I'm in the strategic planning section of the department. But from what I understand from our arborists, there is so much non-native soil along the streets, and just not quality soil, that sometimes native species don't, do very well. They aren't very successful or live very long along the streets. So I think that's why it's even more important that we be planting native trees in our parks and also on private property, that when we have the chance, we can be, increasing biodiversity and supporting the entire food chain with native plants. But for this plan specifically, we didn't offer species recommendations or those sorts of general recommendations. That's more of an implementation thing.
Sure. So this is along a similar line of thought. The question is, how will you manage invasive trees, such as tree of heaven? And I'll elaborate on that, in that, one of the goals of the plan is to preserve existing trees, and long-term invasives in certain areas are going to pose a threat to future forest health, because they're, limiting the natural regeneration that would otherwise occur there. So after you have all the natural tree mortality, those trees are gone, and then you're left with these invasive shrubs and things that don't really provide the urban tree canopy benefits we're looking for. So curious as if that's being addressed at all. So, incorporating native plants is one thing, but what to do about non-native plants that are also invasive.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I've gotten a similar question in other presentations, like calorie pair, and what are we doing with, these invasive trees that now so many of them were planted, or maybe they weren't planted, purposefully, but there's plenty that were. So, and it's a really valid question, because I've kind of heard two different ways to look at it. I mean, they are providing benefits, even though less benefits than other species, but they are storing carbon and filtering the air, et cetera. That said, you made a lot of great points, Jim, about, eventually there'll be a problem, if not right today, they're a problem. So the way that city forestry looks at it is, if we can take the tree out, we will, but we're not ready to we're not clear cutting, whole streets that are planted in calorie pair. We're trying to let that attrition kind of happen naturally and be replacing with different species when we can. I know some cities do that, my grandparents live near Akron and Fair Lawn, you know, they've done that. They've taken out hundreds of pairs because that was something that they wanted to invest in and do that. And I think there's value in that too. One way or another, the tree will, you know, come out. But I think with our plan, you know, we talk about the importance of diversity, and invasives are a threat to biodiversity. We don't have plans, like I said, to go out and we're we're at capacity, you know, like I said, preserving, planting the trees that we can. But if we have the opportunity to take a tree out, we do. And the last thing I'll say about invasive trees in particular, we have in Columbus an executive tree order. It was signed in 2015 by our previous mayor, and that is the policy that requires replacement of public trees during capital projects. So, for example, a sidewalk replacement. You know, if it impacts the public tree, then we need to, you know, whoever's impacting it needs to replace that. There's a ratio with how many inches it is, how many trees get, you know, mitigated. Right now, that policy is odd. It doesn't exclude invasive trees. So it's almost like we're penalizing folks for removing invasive trees. I mean, it's a good thing. We are losing tree inches and we're requiring them to be put back. But that's one of those things that it's an odd, and you know, we should be incentivizing removal of invasive trees and not penalizing somebody for removing them on our behalf. So that's just something else that you made me think of with the invasive tree question, because that is something that we'll be taking a look at as we work on the public tree code.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Another question, can you elaborate on the Columbus Tree Coalition? Talk to maybe the structure, its makeup, responsibilities, etc.
Sure. So I'm definitely not the expert on tree coalitions. I'm learning alongside everybody here. The meeting that we had was informative and it was recorded, and it's on our project website. So if you would like to see, there were two guest speakers that we invited, and from Cleveland and from Boston, and they talked through their tree coalitions and how they were formed. So Columbus doesn't, like I said, doesn't have a tree coalition at the time of writing this plan. I think there's early discussions about it. So yet to be seen what, you know, everybody, the Columbus community thinks about that, how they want to organize. But we did get two examples, like I said. Cleveland actually was kind of in a different position from Columbus in that they formed a tree coalition. The city was one of 5 members. Holden Arboretum was another. I'm forgetting, but there were, there were about 5 partners, and they actually collectively paid for, funded the first canopy study in Cleveland, and they collectively funded Cleveland's urban forest master plan. So they kind of existed first and, got kind of initiated these pieces that in Columbus, the city did a study, like I mentioned, that was published in 2015, and we've invested in this master plan. So we're kind of just hopeful, like I said, that that the community is interested in this, but it's truly up to the community. It's not up to us as a city. We're investing in what we can, and we would love to partner. And I should say we have excellent environmental partners who have been working tirelessly. It's really just that citywide coalition, kind of, it could be a very loose forum. So I mentioned Cleveland. Boston, their tree coalition is very informal, very loose, new, just formed this in the past year or so, and they just meet quarterly. And it's a collection of nonprofits and others who are all involved in tree work, and they just want to keep current, and they can kind of share funding opportunities. They can involve neighborhood groups who are probably not 501c3s, but a 501c3 could be sponsoring them and sharing funding to do, tree-related projects. So there's different models out there. And I should say too that our consultant with Urban Canopy Works, Rachel Comte, we understand that it can be hard to start new things. So she is a resource. In her contract, we've allocated some of her time should the community choose to ask her some questions, if she can be helpful during that process.
Excellent. Another question, is there a plan to work with churches and schools to plant trees, as they often have the space to do so?
Yes, we engaged what we would call large landholders. So Columbus City Schools had representatives in our stakeholder group, and we reached out to several different, the railroads was one. Churches are a great example of large landholders who have a lot of that ability to plant on their space and, on their land. So yes, we would love to engage. It hasn't been, something we've done in the past few months, but we are always looking to partner and help. And really, I'll really candidly, as a city, we have not really before planted trees on private property. We've sometimes partnered around tree giveaways. A lot of our partners do really great tree giveaways, but that's really an avenue we have yet to explore is, any kind of private property planting program, a lot of P's. But, we've really just focused on our own property, and that's something that we know we need to explore because the importance of private property in our urban forest. So, yes.
Yeah, interesting. So that was going to be my next question, is what is the city able or willing to actually do on private property? And has there been any discussion of potentially providing a funding mechanism for groups that are already doing some of that work on private property to release all the liability from the city, but still get the work accomplished?
Yeah, we have not, built out a program or even a pilot. Probably would need a pilot at first and, work out any kinks. Like I said, up to this point, we haven't really delved into that or, dipped our toe into that realm just because of the liability that you mentioned, Jim. We've really focused on our own property. Now, the city does have a tree nursery. So that's something that Forestry has discussed a lot, is there is a lot of capacity at our tree nursery that we have not had the staff to, we haven't been able to fill it up with trees because we haven't had the staff to maintain all of those trees. So that's something that's been talked about, like, well, if there was a coalition, would they be interested? We could provide the space, we could provide the irrigation, but they could, grow trees there and give them away. That's one thing we've talked about. We've talked about, does it make sense for the city to hire a contractor who could then go and plant on private property, if someone signs a waiver? Again, I don't know all the mechanisms. Or could it be a nonprofit partner? I think there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things that different cities are doing. And I think we just have to explore it more. But I think funding is something that we're definitely interested in helping to support, especially with an equity lens. We understand that some neighborhoods are, not able to just go out and buy a tree. And that's probably not the only barrier either. The maintenance of the tree is another barrier. But yes, we're interested in all of that.
Thank you. Another great question related to private property. Has there been a survey and reconsideration of codes for required space for trees in large private parking lots like shopping centers? It seems that most trees do poorly in these lots, and the planting is often pretty sparse.
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't delved into that. Like I said, we're just getting to our public tree code here now, coming out of this master plan. We will be engaging other city departments like Department of Development and Department of Building and Zoning Services to handle more of those landscaping requirements, requirements as you're building out a property. So I think if there's the opportunity to explore and revise parking, trees required in parking lots, I think it's probably a growing space issue just as much as, the amount of trees required in general. I think those trees, like any urban tree, they would get stressed out. They get stressed out just like we get stressed out standing in a hot parking lot, So yes, I would say that while we haven't, again, delved into that piece of the code, I'm hoping that our other city departments are seeing those opportunities. We're also involved, my department, Recreation and Parks, is involved in the zoning code review and update to see, and just like we're involved with their code review, they'll be involved in ours, and building and zoning was involved in our urban forestry master plan creation. So they're aware of this plan, and hopefully we can continue to insert trees wherever we can in their best interest.
Great. Another question, what is the timeline for the preservation code for public trees?
So we're hoping to kick off in December, and the timeline in terms of getting public input, we're still sorting that out because we haven't had our kickoff meeting yet. My hope is, and what the consultants have proposed, we have a subcontractor, Davy Resource Group, so same consultants who helped us analyze the code in the first place for our plan. They'll be doing the research and drafting the code. The plan is, they've proposed 6 months. So as long as everything goes smoothly, we're hoping to be able to take it to City Council summer of 2022.
Thank you. There are currently no other questions, but if anybody has any lingering questions, now is the time to submit it. Otherwise, I really appreciate you joining us tonight, Rosalie. This is all excellent information. Really glad to provide an opportunity for people to hear about this. This presentation was recorded and it will be sent out and posted on our website for future viewing. With that, if there are no other questions, I'll end the meeting.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk to you all. I really appreciate your attention and your really insightful questions. And I would just encourage you to, we do have a project, or we have our project website, which is cool, has an interactive canopy map that you could explore the 2013 data and look down as close. If you zoom in, you can put in an address, you can look at your canopy just by block. But I would also say we have an email list. If you want to sign up for updates on this project, we will not bombard you. Literally, it's like every several months. It's just whenever we reach a landmark and we want to share something out, sign up for updates on the city website for the Urban Forestry Master Plan, and keep informed. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosalie. There was one more question asking if you can link to the project website. Are you able to share that in the chat?
Yes, it's columbusufmp.org. But I will pull it up real quick. Actually, once I pull it up, Jim, I mean, we have like 5 minutes. I'd be happy to show everybody, like I could share my screen. You can look at it on your own too, everybody, but might as well show you is that cool?
Go for it. Yeah, that's great.
All right. So this is our project website, columbusufmp.org. This is the landing page. We post updates here. So I mentioned that coalition discussion. So if you're interested, this is the update, and there's a recording of the meeting as well as the slides that were presented. You heard a lot of the updates from me today, but you'll get to hear the presentation from David Meshlam of Boston, Elizabeth Grace of Cleveland. So there's just updates here. We post news articles. I mentioned that 1.45 million that passed City Council. So that was kind of the last news article we've had, but you can see just kind of the updates that have been happening along here. We have some frequently asked questions about the Urban Forestry Master Plan, and a lot of good information about, again, you'll be experts now after you've heard me go on and on about it, but a lot of this will look familiar to you. And, we went through the process and, all these sources. Our project team members are listed, just if you're curious, the 30 or so folks who met with us monthly, as well as all of the information on the 3 workshops that we did with our advisory group members. So The PDFs and handouts are available here online, as well as the 100 or so organizations who we engaged in the process. And then this is the canopy map that I mentioned. So if you click on this image, it'll open up a new tab, and it's an interactive web map. So there's 3 ways to interact. You can click to see the percent of land. So at this high level, it's community level, right? So Northland is 25% tree canopy. And then if you hover over the pie chart, you can see it's 43% hard surface, 31% open space, and that 25% of tree canopy. You can also, put in an address. So this is my office, 1111 East Broad Street. So it'll take you, and then when you get to that more granular level, you can see that it's down to the block group. And if you click, it'll tell you the census block and the tree canopy percentage, as well as the 81% hard surface that is surrounding my office building. But anyway, so it's kind of cool, or I think it's really cool. I think my colleague John Bowers did a great job. And then it just keeps the community-wide, label there, just so you don't get super lost. But this tool, we've used it for applying for grants. It's interesting, but it also might be useful to you as you're applying, if you're applying to any sort of grant around tree-related efforts. I think our partners have found it useful for that reason. And then, I think, and then I'm remiss if I didn't mention that the plan itself is available online. This green one is the master plan, and we also have an accompanying technical report that details all of our methodology that we used in our analysis. It was already long enough, so we pulled that out into a technical report. But yes, you can download the PDF here. The first 15 pages or so are an executive summary if you don't want to dive into 150 pages, which I totally understand. And that is pretty much it. The last thing I'll show you, since I have your attention, is if you want to sign up for those updates. So that was the project website we just looked at. We also have something here on our Columbus.gov, so our city website, and you can click there and sign up with our Gov delivery system to get email updates. So that is that. Thank you for letting me show a couple more things to you, and I hope it was helpful.
All right, thank you so much, Rosalie. It was a great presentation. All right, take care, everybody. Happy holidays.